for someone who's been around as an economist as long as I have, this is something that we have never seen before, and you hear this over and over again, unprecedented, but we really are in uncharted waters. The first thing to realise is that this is first and foremost a health crisis. And because we are responding to a health crisis saying you can't go outside, you can't run your shop, you have to close your restaurant, that is having massive economic consequences, but in a way that no previous economic crisis ever has. Normally, we get to an economic crisis because the economy is running too fast and interest rates have to go up, or we've had a financial bubble. It's caused by economic factors, and we economists understand all of that. This is a very different beast. And so what we're saying is all these things can't happen. So we are literally freezing the economy in parts. That said, we've got other parts of the economy that suddenly, think toilet paper, think food, certainly alcohol, but even, funnily enough, paint and stuff. Everybody's nesting. You're stuck at home, so suddenly we're all, those of us that might have a partner who's not fully busy. We're keeping them busy by saying, okay, you can go and clean the tiles on the roof. There's a lot of nesting going on. So, but all jokes aside, there are some parts of the economy that actually are still running, still operating. But obviously there's an awful lot out there. There are large queues at Centrelink we've seen. The government's tried to help that a bit by introducing this JobKeeper allowance to try and give people a little bit more money, but also more importantly, a connection to their place of work so they can try and think about, well, if we're not able to do our core business, X, how could we maybe think about doing something, Y, something slightly different over here for the duration? And we are seeing some companies, I'm sure people will have heard of, gin companies now making hand sanitizer. There's one restaurant that's actually employing its people to make desks because we're all working from home, and so there's a shortage of desks in the office works and the like. So we're all trying to grapple with this in the best way that we can. But what essentially is happening is that we have said to parts of the economy, stop. And that means that people are not finding enough work. They don't have as much money to spend, even if they are getting job seeker or JobKeeper allowances as when they were in work. And that means they're spending less. That creates less demand in the economy. And that goes around in circles. And it means we need lots of help from the government, which they are, to their credit, trying to do.
Are you happy with the government's response financially?
Look, I think as a first stage, they're doing as much as they can. They have certainly thrown the kitchen sink at this. We went in a very short period of time from 17 billion to 60 odd billion to now 130 billion. That's big numbers. That is very big numbers when you're talking about budgets and levels of debt. But it's the minimum that needs to be done. And I think they're to be congratulated for working very quickly. What happens, though, when you work very quickly is that you end up having a few little glitches that you need to iron out. And there are people that are falling through the cracks here, and that worries me. There are people who won't qualify for a particular form of support, and even people who do qualify for that support who might have been earning, twice as much, and suddenly they can't get that support for whatever reason, and their household budget was set for that higher amount of money. So how do they keep paying their rent or paying their mortgage? Well, the banks have stepped in and said, we'll freeze your mortgage for 6 months, but what that actually means is that they're going to, what we call, capitalise your interest. So you're paying interest on your interest. So when you do get your job back, hopefully in 6 months, you will be able to, your mortgage will be that much bigger than it was. So it's not perfect, it's not ideal, but I guess it's how we get through. One thing I will say, though, is that I am a little bit cross about the superannuation. If people can at all avoid it, and I appreciate not everyone will be in this position, but if you can avoid it, particularly young people, it is not, you shouldn't be sacrificing your retirement income because you're not getting the right support today. I want the government to be pressured to step up and, as far as possible, preserve that income, because your superannuation today, your $10,000 today, it could be worth $60,000 or even $100,000 by the time you retire. That's how compound interest works. So it's really important, if you can avoid it, to do that. I think we're going to see lots more from the government. We've already seen them step up in terms of helping fresh food exporters, get their yabbies and lobsters overseas. There's going to be now more that's going directly to specific industries. And I think, we've seen a first stage, but this is by far not.
How do we pay for this?
Well, that's going to be a long and hard road. But look, it sounds $200 billion sounds like a lot. and it is. The current amount of debt that our country owes is $550 billion, give or take. So we're now saying we're going to go up from that amount, which is roughly 20% of GDP in net terms, to going up to maybe 750, 800 billion, right? So we're now sort of saying, well, no, we're getting up to 30, 40% of GDP. When you compare this to the rest of the world, it sounds like massive numbers, but compared to the rest of the world, the average is 80%. And that's after there's been, all this period of the last few years of quite good world growth where they've been able to pay down some of it. We are in a good position. If we were just to pay the interest rate alone, we could raise our Medicare levy from 2% to 2.05%, and we could pay for the interest bill on this. So it's not huge, but we do need to pay the debt down over time. And so we are going to have to make some tougher choices. You will see that happen. I mean, remember that famous hockey budget where, everyone said we had a budget emergency then, and everyone went, whoa, we're not prepared to do that level of thinking. I had a journalist ask me this morning, so, what do you think about raising the GST to 12.5%? I'm going, whoa, how about we just get through this crisis first and then think about how we might need to change taxes down in the future. And if you're going to change the GST, that might be one way to do it. But then you're going to have to make a whole lot of other changes around income tax to make sure that you're not disadvantaging particularly low-income households. So there's lots that we need to think about it. But it is definitely true that we will be paying for this for a long time to come. And there will have to be potentially some tough decisions. But the best way to pay for it is to get the economy going more strongly, to get people in jobs and get businesses thriving so they're paying out the tax that helps pay off the debt, that allows us to run the government that we want to run, to give us education and health services without getting further and further into debt. So there are things that we can do. We can do it slowly. Growth will help us pay down debt over time. There will be some tricky decisions. There's no two ways about it. There will be some tricky decisions. And, I do feel sorry for the younger generation, as old as that makes me sound, because, the weight...
You mean us, don't you, Nicki? You mean us, girl.
The weight will fall on the youth who are already facing a higher burden of responsibility because of an ageing population, as the old boomers sort of, retire and live in their very, very comfortable properties, with their very comfortable superannuation deals. And, there will be changes that will have to be made.
So can you see the government allowing more people to move into Australia as a consequence of this?
It's a really interesting one, this question. And you remember that, a couple of years ago, well, actually even a couple of months ago, when house prices were rising really rapidly, one of the things that some people were saying was, let's get rid of immigration. Let's not have too many more people in the country. And in fact, the New South Wales Premier was one of those. Let's put a pause, she was saying. But I think that's actually looking at it the wrong way. What you actually need to do to address the affordability crisis is have greater density, have more investment in infrastructure, and deal with it that way, which is what other countries in the world do, instead of saying we're all going to live in our quarter-acre block. You can't. Australia has changed. And if you want to do that, you can't live in a big city anymore, I'm afraid, because we know that immigration brings masses of benefits. And in fact, we economists have a very simple formula called the 3 Ps. And that is that economic growth is based on 3 core Ps. So that's our population growth, a lot of which for Australia is through migration, our productivity, and the amount we participate in the workforce. So if you think about that, the more people we have, the more they're going to want to buy. The more they work, the more they create this virtuous cycle of growth. So I'm working, I have a job, I spend more money, I create another job. And obviously, the more productive I am, so if I produce more with the things that I have in smarter ways, then I'm also raising our economic standard of living. So, but getting back to that first P, the population is such a critical component of this. We need to have population growth, or we see, what's happened to Japan. You have a stagnant population, you put so much pressure on the productivity side of things, and economies just can't keep sustaining that over and over again. So your standard of living, unfortunately, starts to go backwards. So population growth, rather, for a young country like Australia, where there is still room to grow, particularly in regional centres, it's a really important part of our equation. And we will need to see, immigration come back in. As long as our borders are closed, whether it's to temporary holiday makers supporting our tourism sector, or it's long-term supporting the skills in all sorts of areas. You think about how many people are here supporting nurses, for example. In the tech sector, there's skill shortages. We need these people here. And just culturally, from a vibrancy point of view, it makes us better people. So it's a really important part of our economic, but also our social story.
You think the cost of living is going to change as a consequence of this? Are we going to pay more money to live in Australia?
Perhaps not as a consequence of this. I think, at the moment, inflation is very much under control. In fact, the central bank's been trying to lift inflation. They'd say it's too low. You actually don't want to have no inflation at all, because people then don't invest, and it creates other problems. There's a sort of optimal level of inflation that we have, which is why our Reserve Bank says somewhere between 2 and 3% is good. And we haven't hit 2% for quite a long time. We obviously haven't had good wages growth, and that is currently at threat. So if we don't have good wages growth, Sally McManus from the ACTU was talking yesterday about we've still got to go for the minimum wage rise of 4% in the middle of this year. Well, good luck with that, Sally. In these conditions, absolutely minimum wage is too low, but how you do that. So I think, if anything, this particular virus, what it's doing to our economy, what it's doing to unemployment, what it will do to wages, it will suppress inflation for quite a while. It may be that there are some things that we can't get because we can't get things imported into the country, so it might raise the price of certain individual goods. But if you think about things, just have a look at what's happening to some certain food that might normally be exported, fresh food. There's actually lots more fish and seafood products, and actually prices are coming down. So overall, I don't think this is going to have a huge impact, except maybe, I should add in rents. We've got more properties coming onto the market at the moment, so it actually could help lower rental costs for some people. Certainly will lower the cost of housing overall. We saw that there basically was no activity last weekend. Nobody is prepared to buy. This is something that, at these levels, I have never seen anything this extraordinary. And but what I keep coming back to, and what I keep wanting to tell people, is this is not permanent. This is not forever. And it's awful, particularly for some people, particularly if you've lost your job, particularly if you know somebody who's got the virus. But it's not forever, and we have to keep reminding ourselves of that.
Yeah, I think I said to you, I'm in the real estate market, so our clients are just sitting there. And I'm pretty optimistic about the market, but not in the current climate. Obviously, I think at the other side of this, we saw build rates go down over the last 2 years, and that population's still been steady. But I do believe, I'm like you, I think get through the virus, and then we'll see that market start to reinvigorate. What do you think the time frame of that will be? Or am I asking you how long is a piece of string?
Yeah, you are asking me that. Well, you're asking me to have a crystal ball that just my crystal ball is normally reasonably good, but the things that I throw into my crystal ball, which is also known as an economic model, are just so different here, and everything depends upon what happens with the health restrictions. The longer we stay in lockdown, the slower the recovery will be. There is no doubt about that. The more we stay in lockdown, the more people will lose their jobs, or at least lose the level of income that they were used to. The harder things will get to start up. But unlike a previous recession, where normally you sort of go, oh gosh, we've gone too far one way, let's throw a whole load of monetary policy, which is lowering interest rates for people, and fiscal policy, which is government stimulating through their spending. And we say, let's use these two arms of government, we'll get spending out there, and help kickstart the economy. This time around, what kickstarts the economy is actually people being able to go back to what they did. So restaurants being able to re-employ people so that those who still have a job can say, I don't know about you, but I'm desperate to go to the footy and go out and do an art gallery, or, you know, go to a museum or a restaurant. If those who have jobs at the end of this can do that, then they're going to be creating more jobs for others, and that creates more jobs. And that's the whole beauty of an economy, is when it gets in a virtuous circle, it creates momentum of its own. When it gets in a vicious circle like we're in now, it creates the wrong sort of momentum, and we're going in the wrong direction. But once we switch from that, it will actually act much faster than traditional monetary or fiscal policy will. We don't have to wait for that money to hit the system, for people to say, my mortgage is lower and therefore I might buy, you know, a new set of curtains, and then, you know, the hardware store or the whatever store says, you know, homeware store says, okay, I'm going to stock a bit more, and then I'm going to hire another person, and so on down the chain. This will happen probably more quickly than traditional economic policy levers.
I think people will be dying to get out of their front doors once this is done. I just, you know, I've been in lockdown for 3 weeks, and I'm just dying to get out that front door. And I think, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this. You said that you feel like the government could be spending more, perhaps. I just feel like their initial response financially has been really clever. Are you happy with that?
Yeah, look, I'm very happy. I think they have done a very good job in getting a lot of money to a lot of people very quickly, and well, hopefully they're obviously going to get the legislation passed and get it in place. But I think the banks have also stepped up and said, we'll tide you over, knowing that you're going to get JobKeeper soon. We'll tide you over until that payment is made. So the banks have, honestly, they have gone from, you know, being right down the bottom of the trust spectrum when we went through the Royal Commission and all of that stuff. And they have just done a full 180-degree swing to be able to say to us, you know, we will help you. So good on them for stepping up and showing and actually walking the talk. I'll give them a few brownie points as well. I think what's going to be really interesting with government is to see how do they specifically use this situation, knowing that they need to spend more money to stimulate different industries. We know, you know, the construction industry, for example, is looking to have support. They're worried that demand is going to dry up in a couple of months. How does government sensibly use the stimulus that they have to address some of our longer term issues? So housing affordability, can they use a clever stimulus package with the construction sector, with financiers, to say we'll put more social housing out there, because we know there's really long lists. We'll deliver more affordable housing more quickly. How do we use this to address problems like climate change? Can we use stimulus spending and in fact existing packages out there to say we're actually going to use this time to say, all right, what's the sort of mitigation or adaptation measures that we would have taken anyway? Let's bring those forward and think about how we spend it so that we can get really good climate outcomes, better climate outcomes, faster climate outcomes. You know, how do we think about the redesign of our cities? What have we learnt from how we're now all, you know, you see you're in lockdown for 3 weeks. We're all sitting at home, we're all Zooming around doing things that we never thought possible. You know, even making our family, you know, my kids don't live at home anymore. We have Sunday night dinner for me is such an important part of my family connection now that they're grown up. And we Zoomed last night, and it's not the same, but gosh, it was just, it was fantastic to have that connection. It was just awesome. You know, we're doing things differently. So what does that mean for the way we live, the way we work? I love to think this is going to be so empowering for women, particularly, to say, whose bosses might previously have been a bit sceptical about, you know, working from home, yeah, that just means you're lying around, you know, having a cup of coffee. Well, no, actually, this is demonstrating how well people do work from home. I'm busier than ever have meetings all the time. It's, you know, we're keeping really connected, and it's good because we're really collaborating and thinking in ways that you kind of take for granted when you're often in the office. So there are so many things that are changing.
Yeah, so the way that we will work as a consequence of this will be entirely different. You see that as being, I actually agree with you. I think it's an incredibly, if we're going to take anything away from this, I think this is fantastic. And even just the government providing that childcare package so mothers can go to work and not worry about their babies and their babies are safe. I mean, that I almost kind of feel like that should have always been on the table anyway for women to be able to have their children at childcare and know that they're being paid for, not by the money that they earn. It would be great to think.
We've all known that for a long time, and economists have said the same, but the government's just gone, we can't afford it. And it's going to be interesting after this. I mean, the Labor Party got, lambasted for their suggestion that they subsidise childcare wages in the last election. And whilst the mechanics of what they were suggesting might have not actually been that practical, the fact that they were thinking about the importance of it was a really good signifier. And the fact that the government's come in now and said, we're going to do this, we understand the importance. What does that mean for after Corona? Can you take this off? How do you go forward? It's going to be tricky.
I'd like to think that would be something that they'd keep on the table. To be honest, I feel like, I mean, there's a whole other show inside of this, empowering women in the workforce, and I think that's really vital. So, what happens to? Well, I think Australia will recover well from this. I think this is all make believe. I think they will, but we're a shop. Australia's a global shop. What if the rest of the world does not recover to the same trajectory as Australia? Who do we trade with? How do we? I mean, do we become an insular community and we trade with each other? Because if Wuhan doesn't recover and Italy doesn't recover and Britain doesn't recover and America doesn't recover as quickly as we do, what does it happen to our bottom line?
So, first of all, I think everyone will recover. It's just a question of time. Yeah. We've been through all sorts of crises before, and this virus, even if worst case scenario, we don't find an antiviral treatment, we don't find a vaccine, eventually we will get to herd immunity. So one way or another, we will get through this. I mean, hopefully it'll be sooner rather than later, but we will get to the end of this. The question then is, if for a year or 2 years or even 3 years, we can't trade as much with the rest of the world, what does that look like? And I think, you're already seeing, Wuhan has opened up its ports. We are seeing more exports going back there. What we're not seeing, of course, is, education students coming out to Australia to our universities. And that's a big hit to our trade account. It's a big hit to our economy. Can we find ways to engage them online? Well, everybody is doing that now. Which means you can basically go to university anywhere in the world without leaving your front door, which is important. We will find ways to trade around this because Australia does a lot of services sector. So it's those things like educational, financial services. Those are things that can continue to some degree, at least, throughout this period. There is no doubt, though, that we will be importing less, which means some of our supply chains are going to be disrupted. So we are exporting less. So a lot of the revenue that we get is going to be disrupted. The global economy is forecast to shrink this year. That will affect Australia. We can't be an island. We can't be insular. Our economy will shrink as a result of that if we think that we can go it alone. And this is one of those economic theories that you learn very early on that you actually see playing out well in the real world, is that we all need to trade to what we call our competitive or comparative advantage. So I can do economics, you can do real estate. So let's not me do a little bit of this and a little bit of that. I specialise, and countries do the same thing, and we need to get back to that. There is no doubt that the world is going to be not as friendly to us, and it will hold back our economy in the year ahead. But again, I do look to the other side of that. I do think, though, that one of the things we've already seen out of this is for the tourism sector, we've become incredibly dependent on China. All the growth was coming from China. And one of the things that, the government said is, we're going to spend more on promoting Australia to other countries when this is over, to try and really boost the take that we get from there as well, so that we don't have too many eggs in one basket. If you go back 30 years, the saying was, America sneezes and Australia catches a cold. Well, now it's probably an unfortunate analogy, but now it's China. We have a lot vested in China. And whilst it makes sense on a lot of fronts, we also need to be careful that we do have this is showing you how diverse we need to be to protect against the sorts of shocks. This is not something that you would expect to happen on any sort of regular basis, knock on wood, but we do get shocks, and you do want to make sure that you're not too vulnerable to one particular country, economically speaking.
Yeah, I think I think you're pretty optimistic, and I love that about spending this time with you today. Thank you so much. Is there anything you want to end on? Is there anything you want to finish on? I know that having you on the show is a big deal for me. What do you want to say to those guys out there?
Look, I'd say just please don't give up hope. Please know that this will get to an end. I absolutely understand the human face of this. I'm not just an economist that sits there and says, unemployment goes up to 8% or 10%. I know what the human cost of that is. I know this is very tough. But this too will pass. It's something my dad used to say to me. And in the meantime, anything that you can think of to improve your skills, go and do an online French course or something that helps stimulate your brain, that helps you get through. If you are one of the unfortunate ones who's lost a job, if you're in a job, go hell for leather to work out how you can make that even better. If you own a business, please look out for your employees and do everything you can to keep them as mentally engaged. It's not just about the dollars, it's about how your brain acts. And that's going to be the toughest thing for all of us in this, is keeping our mental well-being. But know that this will be over. We have been through so many economic crises in the past. It's the global financial crisis, the recession that we had to have back in 91, the dot-com crisis. We've done this. We know our central banks, our governments are throwing everything at this, and we will come through this stronger. And I seriously believe that we're in an age where we're actually, because we are questioning capitalism, we're saying, how do we come through this and make the world a better place when we get to that proverbial bridge, on the other side.
What a beautiful way to end. I want to thank you for joining us and for your participation. I will be in touch with you again. I'll have you back on the show in the next couple of months. I'd love to catch up. Everything changes so quickly nowadays. So be safe. Thank you for your contribution. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.